spy cells, and I'm certainly open to going through the documentation of that. I can only count for what I've studied, and only to the extent that I've verified it through multiple sources and so on. So then we won't go into that any further. Then finally you have a mythology about yourselves as being morally superior, and I just showed you some of the factors that should wither that away. And then there's the two suppressed pieces of information. The two, which is the dirty secret is they really invaded because they don't like him, and it's convenient for them, and it was opportunistic. And then the second issue is that actually that's suppressed is that if you're the bottom 40% of the population, you'd be better off in Libya than here in the United States. I have to see it to believe it, but that's what all the statistics indicate. And that's why when we look at the New York Times today, we will be very disturbed at their primitive level of operation, if you don't mind my tipping my hand, that I'm not going to treat them very favorably. And this is an attempt to be objective. I constantly correct myself. I do believe that the reformists in Libya are completely legitimate. I think there are elements of the rebellion that are violent, that have to be very carefully monitored. And I think that the basic principle, you don't interfere in a nation's internal affairs normally, has been grossly violated here. And so that's non-objective elements of my thinking. So what we've got here is this article, which is their editorial on the 30th of June, the Libya Campaign. 4 months into the NATO air campaign, Colonel Muammar el-Qaddafi is still in power, protected by loyalists and mercenaries. So here at least they acknowledge loyalists exist. Americans are weary of war, and patience in Europe is also wearing thin. But NATO must not give up, and here they're going to tell us why. If Colonel Qaddafi is allowed to have his way, thousands more Libyans will die. So this is part of the Western narrative, which you can read on my website under Libya Conflict Intel. There's an Excel sheet attached to it. And let's see here what we have to say about that. If we were his teacher in high school, please support this statement that thousands will die. Then secondly, Ron Paul went on record as saying he's not killing his own people. So there's a lot of evidence that I've also heard Patrick Coburn, who's a specialist in this area, who said that the number of casualties was under 200, and that there's been a complete double standard with the other places. So let's see here. Then he goes on to say the credibility of NATO in this country would be severely damaged. So as a high school teacher, I would say, how does choosing to continue bombardment of a country, if in fact it is a neutral or hold argument that has merit, how would be continuing the bombardment of a country save your reputation, and how could you possibly make that your second line in your argument that you need to save your own reputation after you've made a blunder, if in fact the first statement can't be supported, the more Libyans will die statement? I mean, it's a very vacuous remark, especially considering thousands are dying now through a surgical strike that is inflaming opinion of the world against us, destroying our credibility, terrifying small neutrals. At any rate, it's a craven thing to talk about your credibility here. Credibility is a mafioso concept that what they could say is reputation. Colonel Qaddafi, who is there's a long history of the abuse of the word credibility as a pseudonym for muscle. Colonel Qaddafi, who has a long history of sponsoring international terrorism, is not one to let bygones be bygones. So here another craven remark, which is that if we are in the wrong, he might hurt us for it. Now, in a neutral situation, there might be some credibility that you would leave a stung hornet alive, but that is a very primitive argument to use, again, in your lead. And when determining course of action, you should show the moral and ethical dimensions when there's loss of life involved. It's very bizarre to show your own craven self-interest before you evaluate the huge amount of infrastructure and lands and peoples involved, families, and that you wouldn't even go into that is a troubling lack of ethical awareness. Then he goes on to talk about the makeshift army improving. They slip in the fact that it's armed by France without going into the fact that it's a very controversial move. NATO strikes on military command centers have done real damage. And then, of course, you might want to discuss some of that damage has been to women and children and wiping out and damaging buildings. I mean, we've done billions of dollars of damage to the country, and it's another callous disregard, another ethical lapse. The International Criminal Court indictment is controversial. I can't say they shouldn't insert that statement, but this business about cronies, again, the character assassination of the Colonel Qaddafi. Now, he may deserve it, but it's not helpful. There are reports of long, and it continues to caricature the opponent. It continues to build the Western narrative. That's what I'm really talking about. There are reports of long gasoline lines in Tripoli and rising bread prices due to the blockade. There is no talk about the fact that, as Cynthia McKinney, a former American congressperson who went to Libya, said, that we have a problem here of being collective punishment, using food as weapons against the UN. So there is a concern there. On Thursday, people fleeing Tripoli told of overnight gunfire and signs of revolt. Again, this insistence on this anecdotal signs of total lack of support for Gaddafi and blindness to the support. It's building the Western narrative. It's right out of my punch-down block. Then they go on to say that we can't have a ceasefire because the government could regroup. And that is a horrible thing to say because even the government, there's so many formulas for sit-down talks now. So the formula I recommend would be the first round, Gaddafi's still in country, there's a ceasefire. People are pointing to go to this talks, and the Libyan government agrees that if the majority opinion, in some way constructed, meets a minimum requirement for assuring fair elections in the country, that if the majority opinion of this Peace Talks Council demands that Gaddafi be outside of the country during the final phase, that they would abide by it. So you create a ring within a ring. Okay, you say, we're going to sit down, we're going to stop shooting, and we're going to decide whether Gaddafi has to go as Libyans. Okay? As long as there are safeguards to the Libyan cause and to the loyalist cause as politically that they can participate and that their infrastructure won't be liquidated, etc. So, at any rate, it's a terrible thing to reject a ceasefire callously because this, again, shows very little sympathy for human life and limb and property, in my opinion. They should mention the fact that that Gaddafi is hated by Muslim fundamentalists because he is a socialist and it gives full equal rights to women. They should discuss the case of women's rights in Libya and give us some assurance that they won't be damaged. Of course, that isn't done here. Then they go on to suggest confiscation of 30 billion, and here they use newspeak again, frozen Gaddafi government funds. You could just call it frozen Libyan government guns. Frozen Libyan government funds. You don't have to insert the word Gaddafi in here. There is no evidence that Gaddafi has systematically raked off billions of dollars into his private accounts. He has lived modestly. His children have lived high off of the hog, but it still would run into the millions and not the billions. And the country has produced $1 trillion worth of oil since 1960 probably, and will produce another trillion before it's done. Which is why people would like to get it out of United States and other countries need to remove the legal obstacles to getting that money. So what do you think that sends as a signal of confidence to the investment world about putting your money into European and American banks? As soon as they decide you're not their buddy anymore, you don't have that money anymore. This includes as an American citizen under the Patriot Act, you can have all your money confiscated. So there's reasons to buy gold above and beyond the ones you've heard about. There's been reason to talk about. Okay, so then they go on to say that we are eager to see an end of the fighting, but Washington must stand firmly with the rebels and reject any solution that does not involve the swift ouster of Gaddafi and real freedom for Libyans. So this remark is this business about rejecting a ceasefire is very troubling, although it isn't the most aggressive line in here. But again, it's putting a precondition on a country that they must exile their figurehead. It would be like somebody asking us to kick George Washington out of the country. Not in a moral equivalency, but in a historical equivalency. He founded the modern Libya, along with the officers' coup, etc. Thank you.